that our Tallinn community grow into something similar. And why I'm here today, basically in Ignite we have quite a long story of using Google products, starting from Google Apps for our company infrastructure to GUID and Android development. But today I'm going to talk about a bit different thing, about our experience in using one of Google remote APIs. It's Google Calendar. This talk is going to be quite short, so if you have any questions, please keep them for then. Let's start with a question. Did any one of you use any Google remote API, any service API? Which ones?
Calendar?
Calendar. That's funny, because there are so many of them, but it's strange.
Maps, probably.
Apps.
Maps API.
Yeah, this might be more popular, I suppose.
YouTube?
YouTube. Yeah, YouTube is also quite popular.
Contacts.
So if I would tell something wrong, then fix me. But first couple of theoretical words. Why do we care about Google APIs at all? It's might not be so interesting how it sounds. And nowadays it's obvious that development is expensive. It's really expensive. If you start doing something from scratch, then you have to waste a lot of time. And reusing is one of the solutions to this problem. And basically, developers reuse all the time. We use libraries, we use application servers, we even Google for errors instead of trying to solve them ourselves. And using remote APIs is something similar, but in a bit larger scale. Of course, it has own issues, but it also has own benefits. And one of the benefits that it gives is called integration. Probably you're not the only one who is using this service, and maybe there are already many users around there, and to basically join the community. And you cannot get that with just the library. Nowadays, many, actually most, I suppose, popular web resources offer remote APIs. Facebook has them, Google has them, many others. But what makes Google different in that sense is that their range of services is quite huge, and it is highly possible that your application might need some functionality that Google has to offer in their service. Today we're concentrating on Calendar API, but even if you're not interested in calendars, you still might find something interesting for yourself, because all other APIs share quite a lot in common. Small example of what can you do with that, and basically how we got to Calendar API. Once upon a time, we had a small research project. It was not about any Google APIs at all. It was about HTML5 capabilities for mobile development. We wanted to build an application which would look nice on mobile devices, wanted to check out what HTML5 has to offer. And we also wanted to make some product at the same time. Not for selling maybe, but so that we could use it somewhere, here today for example. And the idea behind this product was to make a conference schedule that would look nice on mobile devices. And that idea came from personal experience, basically, because many of our colleagues attend conferences, and some even organize them. And they noticed one issue, that when you print the schedule of application of conference, on paper, then it is either informative with lots of text, or it is compact, but not both at the same time. Anyway, it's not very useful. And also, some time ago, I tried using normal Google Calendar for holding conference schedule, And at some point it worked quite nice. I was able to put a schedule there. I was able to take it with me to a conference on my Android device. But viewing this schedule was quite awful. And here you can see an example. This is basically 1 day from the conference. And can someone guess how many tracks does it have? How many tracks? Yeah, events happening at the same time in different places.
2.
3.
2.
No. Well, well, yeah, it shows that this UI, it can handle lots of complex stuff, but it really sucks at showing multiple events happening at the same time. And correct answer is 2. It has 2 tracks. And that's what we wanted to get from it. So now you can see that there are 2 tracks, main hall, Volvo hall. And that's a screenshot from application that we made. And yeah, the idea was that we will take all the great stuff that calendar has to offer, but we will make our own UI around it. And we also wanted to put it into conference context. So usually conferences want to put their sponsors. Usually there is some Twitter feed, and yeah, usually there is some about section. But that's enough about theory, and now we can move to stuff that might interest developers a bit more. Let's see some technical stuff, what this API is. Since version 3, Calendar API uses JSON-based REST. In version 2, it was Atom-based REST. It was called G-Data Protocol. It was quite complex. And actually, version 2 still exists. It's still out there. You can use currently both. But it is highly recommended to switch to newer version 3. Probably they will skip version 2 at some point. And on this slide you can see a sample of HTTPS GET request to events collection, and it also has some authorization, pure HTTP. And response comes in form of JSON. And here you can see also JSON payload. Now, REST assumes that you can use any HTTP capable tool for making requests. But this payload, together with authorization, it might be quite complex. And even Google recommends not to use your own custom-built parsers. They have a set of client libraries that you can use. So they support quite many frameworks and popular languages, and Python is here in the center. It's not my preference. The only thing it means is that Python is the only client library which has stable status. All libraries above here, they have beta status, and those here have alpha status. We used Java library, and it has beta status, but nevertheless, we didn't have any issues with that. And also each REST API consists of resource collections. So does Calendar API. Those are the collections from Calendar API, not so many of them. And each collection has a set of operations. This is a typical set that most of them have. Some have some subset, some have some extra operations, but in general it's a usual CRUD set of operations. And this is an example of using Java client library. What it does, it accesses events collection. It takes all the events from calendar with this ID. Well, normal ID should be a bit longer, this is shortened one. And after you get events, you can list through them and, for example, get summaries or any other properties. Now, if someone used API version 2, they might notice that this one is now much shorter. It's really much better. API version 2 was Atom-based, so it had many methods in between which are related to Atom and not connected to Calendar API at all. Okay, now each public API should be secure, and Calendar API is not an exception. And Google uses OAuth 2 for security. There is actually OAuth 1 also, which was used some time ago. You can still use it, but it is highly recommended also to switch to OAuth 2 because OAuth 1 has some limitations. And another thing is that OAuth is quite simple and elegant when it comes to idea, but implementing it might be quite difficult. That's another reason for using client libraries provided by Google. They handle most of authorization of applications. And when it comes to OAuth authorization, it's important that there are many different flows that your application might require. Sometimes it doesn't even depend on application, it depends on the device where you put your application. And Google supports some of them. One interesting example is called client-side applications. And those applications are mostly JavaScript based. And this means that client browser directly communicates with Google service without interacting with your application service. This also means that if a client closes browser, then there is no more interaction with Google service. Completely different case is web server applications. And it's also called offline application, because in this case, interaction with Google service happens when browser is, when client is present at the application, but also when client leaves the application. Actually, that might sound quite scary, because maybe in some applications you authorize the application to access your data, like calendar events. You leave it, but application will continue to interact with that service. Another interesting case is installed application. This is quite similar, but in this case, application is distributed to some devices, and interaction with Google service happens when user is actively using application or it's running in the background. But when it goes to background, application continues using Google service. This is also an interesting case called devices. This is used when your application is installed on a device with limited input capabilities. Because usually OAuth requires at least a web browser. But in this example, I used alarm clock as simple device. It can be any other. Obviously, alarm clock doesn't have browser. But you still have to make authorization. And this flow allows you to make authorization using device with richer input capabilities and use the application on device with limited capabilities. And the simplest case is service accounts. We used that one. In this case, your application server directly communicates with Google, and there is no client authorization at all. But it also comes with a trade-off that you can access only publicly available data or some data which doesn't require user authorization. And each authorization request contains scopes. This means that if you ask from user to authorize your application to use his data in read-only mode, then user can be sure that he will not do anything else. For example, in Calendar API, there are two scopes. First of them gives full access to your calendar, and the second one gives read-only access. And if you ask the user for a full access, Google will show it to you. Probably user in most cases should leave that application. That's all great, but we're not living in fairy tale, and Google cannot handle unlimited amount of client applications. That's why there are limits for all APIs. Usually those limits are requests per day. For example, Calendar API has 10,000 requests per day limit. In our case, it was not a problem because we were making something like 140 requests per day, because we used only single calendar and we cached it for a long time. But if you will be...
But it's against the Google license to cache the data, because I worked with Google Maps and they told you can't cache the geocoding.
Well, I suppose it's specific to Google Maps.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's not it's allowed in Google Calendar. Are you sure?
I hope so. Well, there is always some caching. We just made it a bit longer. And usually if you require bigger quota, then you can do that. There is usually a price list that you can use and go above. But for Calendar API, there is no such price list for some reason. But there is some form where you can request a larger quota. Don't know how it works, we didn't use it. 10,000 requests was enough for us. And there is also a second limit, but this one you can set yourself to control traffic. It's requests per user per second. In this screenshot you can see Google API console, and those are the limits for Google Calendar API. 10,000 requests per day, and per user limit is 5 requests per second. This is default value, but you can choose whatever you want. And this is a link to request more resources. About this per user limit, I think that this should be like your last resort. Probably if you hit that limit, then your application is already crashed or something. So you should control it on application side. And as I said previously, there are many more other services. Those with bigger phones are just those that interest me more, but really it seems like 100 or something. I hope that you will find something interesting for you. And that's it for today. If you have any questions?
What about push notifications? Are they supported?
Push notifications from Google Calendar?
Yes.
I haven't seen such things. It was only REST. Yes, you have to pull. Probably it's some other service.
Any more questions? Andre? Heavy user of Google Calendar API. Haven't run into 10,000 limit yet.
I've requested more actually.
You requested more.
Yeah.
How are they?
Well, I believe if you explain it in a way that benefits both sides, then they'll be happy to maybe increase it a notch a bit.
But you did request.
So, what is the benefit for the Google then? What have you told them? What's the benefit?
Pretty pleased. I think.
No, I believe surely if people can continue using, if Google doesn't feel that your thing that you do kind of attacks Google's
Cannibalizes
stuff,
their-
yeah, or cannibalizes. If there's like symbiosis and both can share data, then it's I don't believe Google should oppose that.
Share data, you mean user data? You're sharing it to them?
No, I mean if a single person uses both your application and Google Calendar and your application, Google Calendar share information. That's
So still Google does
benefits
all the
both.
work.
Yeah, Google does all the work.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Logical. All right. Thanks a lot.
Name was your size, right? Yes. Thanks.
Right. Thanks. That concludes the official part of the meetup.